The applause that night at the Covent Garden Opera House was not for the singers. It was a thunderous, rolling wave of acclaim for the woman in the grand tier box who rose with regal grace to acknowledge it. Lady Genevieve Marchmont, the most celebrated and most notorious patroness of the arts in London, was holding court. Below, on the stage, the final chords of Tosca faded. The soprano, Flora Gold, took her bow, but her eyes, blazing with a hard, jealous light, were fixed not on the adoring gallery, but on the box where Lady Marchmont stood, a vision in silver and diamonds. Beside Flora, the tenor, the baritone, they too glanced upward, their professional smiles taut. The entire company knew where the true power, and the purse strings, resided. In the shadows of the wings, the opera house manager, Mr. Harold Strickland, mopped his brow with a silk handkerchief. The performance had been a success, but his nerves were frayed. Lady Marchmont's whims dictated his seasons. Her disapproval could end careers, his own included. Standing next to him, the gaunt, intense figure of the conductor, Maestro Silvio Forelli, watched the box with an expression of pure loathing. A genius, but a temperamental one, he had seen his latest composition shelved by Lady Marchmont's decree. The audience began to filter out, a river of ermine and tailcoats. In Box 7, Lady Marchmont turned to her small, devoted circle. There was her husband, Sir Reginald Marchmont, a quiet, grey man who seemed perpetually half asleep, overshadowed by his wife's volcanic personality. There was her personal secretary, Miss Evelyn Price, a mousy woman in her 40s with watchful eyes and fingers permanently stained with ink. And there was the object of the evening's particular attention. The young, devastatingly handsome Viscount Anthony Dewsbury, who was rumored to be the latest recipient of Lady Marchmont's extravagant and fickle affections. A triumph, my dear Flora, a triumph, Lady Marchmont declared, her voice carrying, as she had not intended it to the stage below. Though the high C in Visi d'Arte was decidedly pinched, don't you think? A lack of proper support. Flora Gold, ascending the steps to the box for the expected post-performance audience, froze, her smile turning to glass. But come, Lady Marchmont continued, oblivious or indifferent to the wound she had inflicted. We shall take supper in my private salon. I have something to discuss, all of you. Her sweeping gaze included Strickland and Forelli, who had approached the box. It was a command, not an invitation. The private salon behind the grand tier was a plush, crimson cavern, a world away from the gilded public spaces. A cold supper was laid on a sideboard. Lady Marchmont held center stage on a divan. I have made a decision, she announced, sipping champagne. This will be my final season as principal patron. A stunned silence fell. Strickland paled. Forelli leaned forward, a spark of something, hope, in his eyes. I am redirecting my funds, she continued, her eyes glinting with malicious pleasure, towards the new cinematograph, the moving picture. It is the future. Opera is a relic. She let the word hang, watching the devastation it wrought. Therefore, my current commitments will be honored, but not renewed. The production of the Bronze Apollo, she said, nodding to Forelli, is cancelled. And Miss Gold, your contract will not be extended. Flora Gold made a small, choked sound. Sir Reginald merely sighed, staring into his sherry. Viscount Dewsbury looked bored. You cannot be serious, Genevieve, Strickland spluttered. The house, we rely on you. That, Harold, was always your first mistake, she said coolly. It was then that Miss Price, ever efficient, approached her employer with the evening's program and a pen. The seating plan for the charity gala next week, my lady. You wished to approve it. Lady Marchmont took the program, a thick, glossy booklet. Ah, yes. Let us see who is worthy of a place in my orbit. She flipped it open, As she did so, a faint, sharp, almost almond-like scent wafted from its pages. She wrinkled her nose. What is that smell? Cheap perfume, no doubt. She brought the booklet closer to her face as she examined the first page. Suddenly, she coughed. A delicate, surprised sound, then another, deeper, more ragged. The program fell from her hands. Her eyes, wide and terrified, bulged. Her hands flew to her throat, her silver nails scratching at the skin. She tried to speak, but only a horrible, dry rasp emerged. Genevieve. Sir Reginald was on his feet, but he moved as if in a dream. Viscount Dewsbury started backward, knocking over his glass. Flora Gold screamed. Maestro Forelli's face was a mask of shock. Strickland stood paralyzed. Only Miss Price acted, rushing forward. "My lady." "What is it?" Lady Marchmont's body convulsed once, a violent, unnatural shudder. Then she slumped sideways on the divan, her eyes staring unseeingly at the crystal chandelier above. The diamonds at her throat glittered mockingly in the light. Chaos erupted. Strickland yelled for a doctor. Sir Reginald finally reached his wife, his hands fluttering helplessly over her. Miss Price, with surprising strength, tried to lift her employer's head. Flora Gold's screams turned to hysterical sobs. In the tumult, no one noticed the fallen program, which had landed face down on the Persian rug. And no one noticed the meticulous, fastidious gentleman in an immaculately cut overcoat who had been observing the dispersal of the audience from the back of the stalls, and who, drawn by the commotion, now stood at the salon's open doorway. His eyes, dark and shrewd, missed nothing. The positions of the people, the fallen booklet, the specific, agonized arch of the dead woman's body. He took one step into the room, his head tilted to one side. His gaze swept the scene, inventorying the horror, the fear, and the poorly concealed guilt on every face. He saw the poison of emotion before any thought of the physical poison. Hercule Poirot had not been summoned, but he had arrived. And in the disorder of the moment, he perceived the beautiful, symmetrical outlines of a most unsympathetic crime. His moustache twitched. It was, he considered, a matter of profound disorder. And order he intended to restore. The arrival of the police, a flock of dark uniforms and official tread, imposed a brittle order upon the Crimson Salon. The medical examiner, a weary-looking man, confirmed what was already dreadfully apparent. Lady Genevieve Marchmont was deceased. The cause, he murmured with professional gravity, appeared to be a toxic agent, likely ingested or inhaled. The faint, lingering scent of bitter almonds pointed to one of the most elegant and feared of poisons. Detective Inspector James Halstead, a solid, pragmatically built man with a weary respect for the complications the upper classes brought to his work, took charge. He ordered the room sealed and the occupants made to wait. It was as he was compiling a list of these unfortunate souls that his gaze fell upon the small, elegant figure standing apart, observing the proceedings with an air of serene, almost artistic appraisal. "Monsieur Poirot?" Inspector Halstead's stern expression softened a fraction. "I didn't know you were here." Hercule Poirot inclined his head. "I had the pleasure of attending the performance, Inspector. The drama, it seems, was not confined to the stage. I was admiring the architecture of the exits when the commotion drew me. A bit of luck for us, then," Halstead said, lowering his voice. "This is a sticky one. Lady Marchmont, no less. VIP. The press will be ravenous. And look at this lot." He gestured subtly with his notebook towards the other occupants, who were now clustered in a tense, silent group by the grand piano. Sir Reginald sat with his head in his hands. Flora Gold was being administered smelling salts by a pallid Miss Price. Viscount Dewsbury smoked a cigarette with studied nonchalance, while Maestro Forelli stared fixedly at the dead woman, as if trying to decipher a complex score. Harold Strickland paced, muttering about ruin. "It is, as you say, a most particular circle," Poirot agreed, his eyes gleaming. "And it is a circle that is, for the moment, firm. The door to this salon was open when I approached, but from the moment the supper party entered until the moment of the tragedy, who came or went?" Halstead nodded. "My first question. According to the lot of them, no one. They were all present when she made her announcement, all present when she took the program, and all present when she died." The door was shut. "If it's poison, it was administered here, in this room, under their noses." "Exactement," Poirot said. "A neat, tidy problem. The how is perhaps more clear than the who. Observe." With a delicacy that bordered on reverence, Poirot used the tip of his own fountain pen to lift the fallen program from the rug. He did not touch it with his fingers. Holding it open, he fanned the pages gently near his face and gave a slight, definitive sniff. "The scent is strongest here, on the front cover, and the first leaf. It is not, as the poor lady assumed, cheap perfume. It is the essence of the peach kernel, or something very like it. A volatile poison, perhaps in a liquid form, sprayed or brushed upon the page. When she brought it close to her face to read, the fumes, they did their work with terrible speed." Halstead whistled softly. "So the program is the delivery method. But who handled it?" "The secretary brought it to her." "Ah, but we must trace its journey, Inspector. It did not materialize in Mademoiselle Price's hands. It was printed, distributed, brought to the box." Poirot's gaze traveled to the manager. "Monsieur Strickland, a moment, if you please." The manager jumped as if goosed. "Yes? What is it?" "This program. Its journey tonight, if you would be so kind to recount it." Strickland mopped his brow again. "Well, they're printed in bulk for the season. Tonight's batch were delivered to the attendants this afternoon. Lady Marchmont's copy, along with those for the other boxes in the grand tier, were brought up by the head attendant, Briggs, before the performance. He placed them in the boxes himself. That's the standard practice. And after the performance, when it was brought from the box to here?" Miss Price looked up, her voice thin but clear. "I fetched it from the box, just as I always did. Lady Marchmont liked to annotate the seating plans. No one else touched it. I brought it straight here and gave it to her with the pen." "You are certain no one else handled it? In the box, perhaps?" "Positive. The others had already begun to move to the salon. I was the last to leave the box." Poirot's eyes swept the room, meeting each pair of eyes in turn, the secretary's defensive gaze, the singer's terrified one, the husband's bewildered one, the lover's bored one, the maestro's furious one, the manager's desperate one. "So," Poirot said quietly to Halstead, "the poison was upon the program before the head attendant, this Briggs, placed it in the box. Or it was placed upon it after, by the one person who admits to handling it alone." He paused, letting the implication hang in the perfumed, toxic air. "Or, naturellement, someone is not telling Poirot the truth. The circle may be closed, Inspector, but within it, the shadows are deep. I propose we interview the head attendant, and then we speak to each member of this tragic ensemble. The psychology, it will tell us what the physical evidence cannot." The head attendant, Briggs, was a man carved from old mahogany and tradition, his distress genuine. He stood in the now cordoned salon, wringing his hands before Poirot and Inspector Halstead. "The programs for the grand tier, sir, are always treated with particular care," he insisted, his voice a hushed echo of the stage. "I collected the bundle from the print room at 4 o'clock. I placed them in the boxes myself, as I always do, just before the doors opened at 7. Lady Marchmont's was in box 5, on the ledge beside her customary seat. Did you handle her specific copy more than the others?" Poirot asked. "Only to place it, sir. No different to the others." And the print room? Who has access? Briggs looked helpless. Why? Nearly anyone, sir. The staff, the performers popping in for a schedule. It's not a locked chamber. It's just a room off the main administrative corridor. A wide avenue of opportunity, Poirot thought. The poison could have been applied to that specific program any time after printing. He dismissed the thankful Briggs and turned to the human puzzle before him. He began with the periphery. A quick interview with the other box holders adjacent to Lady Marchmont yielded nothing. They had seen no one interfere with Box 5. The circle, it seemed, remained tightly drawn around the salon's occupants. Poirot and Halstead commandeered the manager's office for their interviews. The first to be summoned was Sir Reginald Marchmont. The man seemed shrunken, diminished not by grief, Poirot observed, but by a profound existential shock, as if a loud, constant noise in his life had abruptly ceased. "Your wife's announcement tonight, Sir Reginald." Poirot began gently. "It was a surprise to you." "Everything Genevieve did was a surprise," Sir Reginald replied, his voice flat. "One merely weathered it. This was a larger storm than most. Her decision would have affected you financially?" A faint, bitter smile touched the man's lips. "It would have affected everyone in this building. For me, the money was hers, an inheritance. I shall manage. The silence, I suspect, will be rather expensive to get used to." He claimed to have been standing by the sideboard, selecting a canap, when his wife took the program. He saw nothing unusual. Next came Miss Evelyn Price. She was a study in controlled efficiency, even in shock. Her answers were precise, rehearsed. I retrieved the program from the box at approximately 10:47 p.m. I carried it directly to the salon. No, I did not smell the almonds then. I only noticed the scent when her ladyship remarked upon it. I have handled her programs 1,000 times. The routine never varied. And who knew of this routine? Poirot probed. "Anyone who had observed our habits over the last 5 years," she said, a trace of defiance in her eyes. "It was no secret. What did you feel, mademoiselle, when your employer announced the end of your employment?" Miss Price's composure cracked for a single illuminating instant. Her lips tightened, and her stained fingers clenched. "I felt concerned for my future. But I have excellent references. I am not a person given to hysterics, Monsieur Poirot. But you are a person given to deep resentment," Poirot thought as she left. The faithful servant, dismissed after years with a wave of a jeweled hand. Flora Gold entered like a vengeful spirit. Her earlier hysteria hardened into a cold fury. "She killed my career tonight. Murdered it as surely as she was murdered. You want motive? There it is. You were close to her when she died? Close enough to see the justice in it?" Flora hissed, then caught herself. I was horrified. "Did you handle the program?" "No. I wouldn't touch her things. That was the secretary's domain." Her hatred was a bright, clear flame, too bright perhaps for the shadowy, subtle poison of almonds. Viscount Dewsbury sauntered in next, treating the office as a slightly tedious drawing room. Ghastly business. Poor Genevieve. She was entertaining. Her decision to withdraw funding. Did it affect you personally? Halstead asked bluntly. The Viscount's smile was languid. "My dear Inspector, do I look like a man who depends on a lady's patronage?" It was a passing amusement. A rather expensive one for her, but then she could afford it. His aloofness was perfect, but Poirot saw the calculation in his eyes. The end of a wealthy liaison is always a personal financial crisis. Maestro Forelli entered with the air of a misunderstood Prometheus. She was a Philistine, a checkbook with the soul of a Gorgon. My Apollo was genius, and she consigned it to the dark. Where were you when she took the program? I was by the fireplace, contemplating the mediocrity she celebrated. I did not go near her. His motive was pure passionate art, a motive for murder in many a tale, Poirot reflected. Finally, Harold Strickland, a man on the brink of ruin. She was our cornerstone. Without her, the season collapses, commissions fail, it's a catastrophe. Could the opera house survive without her? Barely. It would mean restructuring, drastic economies. His eyes darted about as if already seeing the ghosts of empty seats. His motive was not passion, but survival. A powerful driver indeed. When the door closed on the last of them, Inspector Halstead sighed. Well, they all have a reason to want her gone. Even the husband gets his peace and quiet. But who had the means? Only the secretary handled the program. Poirot was staring at the wall, his mind arranging and rearranging the pieces. Do not be so sure, mon ami. We have established a chain of custody. But in every chain, there is a moment of distraction, of misdirection. We must look for the weak link, and it is not necessarily the one who held it last. It is the one who created the opportunity. The psychology. It points in a direction the physical evidence does not yet see. He tapped his temple. The little gray cells, they are stirring. Inspector Halstead, a man who appreciated a straight line between motive and opportunity, found his line. It led directly to the silent, ink-stained figure of Miss Evelyn Price. The evidence, as he laid it out for Poirot in the manager's office, was compelling. It's the secretary, Poirot. It has to be. She's the only one who admits to handling the program alone, both when she fetched it from the box and when she handed it over. The perfect position to poison it. But the poison was applied earlier. Mon ami. The head attendant, Briggs, placed it in the box before the performance. Poirot reminded him, meticulously aligning a paperweight with the edge of the desk. A theory. The scent could have been weak then, concentrated on one page. Price could have added to it later, ensuring the dose was lethal. Or she could be lying about Briggs entirely. Halstead's fist lightly struck the desk. And look at the tangible evidence. He produced a small enamel fountain pen from an evidence bag. This was found on the floor by the divan, kicked under a fringe in the confusion. It's not the pen Miss Price gave Lady Marchmont. That was a gold-nibbed Waterman, recovered from the deceased's lap. This, he said, holding it up, is a cheap, common pen. And the nib reservoir? It smells distinctly of bitter almonds. Poirot took the proffered bag and examined the pen without removing it. Intrescent. And it belongs to Mademoiselle Price? She admits it's of the type she uses for her shorthand notes, though she claims she lost it days ago. A likely story. Here's how it happened. She has the poisoned pen ready. She fetches the program, gives her ladyship the clean pen. Then, under cover of the general conversation, she somehow applies a final, fatal touch from this poisoned one. Drops it in the commotion. Motive? She's just been publicly, coldly dismissed after years of servitude. She sees her future vanishing. It's clear as day. Poirot listened, his expression giving nothing away. It is a pattern, yes, a simple one. Perhaps too simple. The psychology, it troubles me. Psychology be blowed. We have means and motive. I'm bringing her in for formal questioning. We'll break her story. Halstead did just that. Confronted with the pen, Miss Price's efficient composure finally shattered. She did not confess, but she wept. Dry, angry tears of sheer panic. It's not mine. I mean, it is like mine, but I lost it. Someone is framing me. She was difficult, yes, but she was my life. Her protestations, however, sounded hollow against the physical evidence. The inspector was satisfied. To him, the case was neatly wrapping itself up, a resentful employee, a moment of mad opportunity, a clumsy attempt to hide the tool of the crime. He began drafting his report. Poirot, however, was not drafting. He was pacing the now empty salon, a stage after the principal actor had fallen. He stood where Lady Marchmont had died, his eyes missing no detail. "What is it that does not sit right, Poirot?" he murmured to himself. "The pattern is correct, but the thread is the wrong color." He considered Miss Price. Her resentment was deep, yes, but it was the resentment of the orderly mind confronted with perpetual chaos. Would such a mind choose so public, so dramatic, so untidy a method, a poisoned program in a crowded room? It was a gesture of theater, of passion. Miss Price's vengeance, he surmised, would be more meticulous, more administrative, a vanished will, a discreetly leaked scandal, a slow bureaucratic strangulation of her employer's affairs. Furthermore, the poisoned pen evidence was too obvious. It was a clue that shouted, not whispered. It lay waiting to be found. A woman who could conceive of using a volatile poison on a program would surely dispose of the applicator more carefully than merely dropping it at her own feet. No, this was not the work of the resentful secretary. This was the work of someone who wanted the resentment to be seen, who wanted the trail to lead clearly to Evelyn Price, someone who understood her habits, her stationery, and her likely reaction to dismissal. Someone who needed a scapegoat readily at hand. Poirot's gaze traveled the room, resting on each empty space where a suspect had stood. The husband by the sideboard, the singer near the door, the lover by the window, the maestro at the fireplace, the manager pacing. One of them, he felt certain, was not just a performer on the stage, but a director of this tragedy. The false lead was laid with care. Now he must discern the hand that laid it. He gave a sharp, satisfied nod. The investigation, contrary to Inspector Halstead's belief, was only just beginning. He must now look not for the owner of the pen, but for the mind that wished it to be found. The following morning, Poirot returned to the Opera House, a monument to illusion now hauntingly silent. He had persuaded a reluctant Inspector Halstead to delay a formal arrest. "Give to me but a few hours, mon ami," Poirot had said. "Let us examine the stage upon which this drama was set. Before the principal actor is taken to the wings of a prison cell, his first destination was the print room. It was, as Briggs had said, a cluttered functional space off a quiet corridor, smelling of ink and paper. A young, nervous clerk presided over the dormant machines. "The programs for last night?" Poirot inquired. "They were all printed together?" "Oh, yes, sir. A batch of 500. Done 2 days ago." "And after printing, where were they?" "Stacked here, on this table, for the attendants to collect. Anyone could have walked in." Poirot's eyes roved the room. There was no lock on the door. The means to poison a single program was here, but the opportunity was vast, amorphous. It told him little. He needed to understand the people, not the paper. He sought out Flora Gold, finding her in a cramped floral-scented dressing room, her face bare of its stage makeup, revealing lines of strain. She was defensive, brittle. "Mademoiselle Gold, your performance last night was sublime," Poirot began, disarming her with a compliment. "A tragedy that such art was overshadowed. You speak of her death, or her words?" Flora snapped, then sighed. "I am sorry. I am distraught. You argued with Lady Marchmont recently, did you not? About a certain necklace? A piece of jewelry she promised you, and then withdrew?" Flora's eyes widened. "How did you? That was private. Poirot makes it his business to know. The necklace was a trifle to her, but to you a symbol of recognition, of value beyond price. Its withdrawal was a cruel humiliation. Tears welled in the soprano's eyes, genuine and angry. She enjoyed that, tearing promises away. She said my interpretation lacked emotional truth. She spat the words in a vicious parody of Lady Marchmont's cultured tones. And without her patronage, your future here is uncertain. The anger you felt last night, when she dismissed you before your peers, it was a powerful emotion. Flora drew herself up. It was. But it does not make me a murderer. I express my emotions with my voice. Monsieur Poirot, not with poison. Poirot left her, thoughtful. Her passion was real, but it was a blazing fire, conspicuous, direct. The crime was neither. He next requested the company of Sir Reginald Marchmont in the vast, empty auditorium. They sat in the stalls, dwarfed by the gilded emptiness. Sir Reginald, your wife's will. It would be of interest to the police. Sir Reginald's hands trembled slightly on his knees. I suppose it would. The bulk of the estate comes to me. A life interest, at least. The bequests, too. Others, he glanced towards the grand tier, are contingent on her continued patronage. They lapse now, including a substantial bequest to the Viscount Dewsbury? A dull flush crept up the man's neck. Yes, including that. So her decision to withdraw funding would not only have severed her connection to the Viscount in life, but also in death. A double abandonment. He stood to gain nothing. Sir Reginald said nothing, staring at the empty stage. You were aware of their closeness? One would have to be blind, and deaf not to be, he whispered. A lifetime of quiet humiliation in the words. But I made my peace with it. There are other comforts. Stability. The house in the country. But were there? Poirot wondered. A man can swallow humiliation for a quiet life. But what happens when the source of the humiliation also threatens the quiet? If Lady Marchmont's new passion for cinema had led her to divorce, to cut him loose entirely, Sir Reginald peace might have fractured. As Poirot rose to leave, a stagehand approached, cap in hand. Excuse me, gents. Sorry to interrupt. But we're clearing the props from last night's show. Found this tucked behind a flats in the wings, near the stage left entrance. He held out a small, elegant, cut glass bottle with a gold stopper. It was empty. Poirot took it delicately. He did not need to bring it to his nose. The faint, unmistakable, and now sinister scent of bitter almonds clung to it like a ghost. The stagehand nodded toward the grand tier. That's the quick way up to the private boxes from the stage, that door. Actors use it sometimes. Poirot's heart gave a small, satisfied leap. The plot had thickened. The poison had not been administered in the print room, nor from a pen in the salon. It had been carried, in this bottle, from the world of make-believe on the stage, up to the real-world tragedy in the box. Someone with access to the wings, someone who knew the hidden passages of the opera house. He looked from the bottle in his hand to Sir Reginald's pale, confused face, then down to the stage where Flora Gold, Maestro Forelli, Harold Strickland, and even the Viscount Dewsbury, a keen amateur set designer. He recalled being told all moved with practiced ease. The false lead of the pen was now completely undone. The game had entered a new, more dangerous act. The discovery of the bottle transformed the geometry of the case. Poirot, holding it by its delicate neck as if it were a venomous serpent, felt the click of a pivotal piece slotting into the puzzle. It did not reveal the picture, but it corrected the frame. He dismissed the stagehand with a stern warning to silence and watched Sir Reginald's bewildered retreat. The bottle's provenance was clear. The wings, the domain of performers, and those who moved among them. His mind returned to the salon, reassessing each person not just as a guest, but as a potential actor in a darker production. Foremost was Viscount Anthony Dewsbury. The indolent aristocrat, Poirot had learned, was more than a passive beneficiary of Lady Marchmont's generosity. He had a passion for theatrical design, often haunting the backstage areas of various theaters, sketching sets, and offering unsolicited advice. He knew the hidden stairs. Poirot found him not at his club, but in a surprisingly shabby genteel studio flat in Chelsea, surrounded by architectural drawings and miniature stage models. The Viscount's nonchalance seemed thinner here, stretched over a substratum of anxiety. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, offering a cigarette from a depleted silver case, "I heard they arrested the secretary." "A tidy solution. The police, they are sometimes overfond of tidiness," Poirot replied, refusing the cigarette and studying a model of a Gothic castle. "You are a man of the theatre, I see. A dilettante. It passes the time. And a costly pastime, is it not? These models, the materials, the debts to certain understanding men in Mayfair." The Viscount's smile froze. "I beg your pardon, Poirot." He also makes inquiries. "Your liaison with Lady Marchmont was not merely an amusement. It was a financial necessity. Her decision to end her patronage was a disaster. But her death, with you as a legatee, would be a salvation. Yet if she had already cut you off, the will would change, non? The bequest would vanish. Time for you was running out. Dewsbury's languid pose solidified into something harder. This is impertinent speculation. Is it? You have the knowledge of the theatre's passages. The poison was found there. You had the motive, the most primal one. Money. And you had the opportunity. You left the box for a breath of air just before the final act, according to Miss Price. Where did you go, mon cher Viscount? To the wings? To retrieve a small bottle you had hidden earlier?" The man's face paled. "This is ridiculous. Anyone could have planted that bottle. The singer, the conductor, they live in that world. Even Strickland." "Exactement," Poirot said softly, his eyes bright. "That is what is so interesting. The bottle points to a world you all share. It does not accuse you alone. It whispers that the murderer is one who thinks in terms of scenes and props. It is a theatrical gesture, just as the poisoned program was. This crime is not a mere act of rage or greed. It is a production." Poirot rose. "You will excuse me. My interest now turns to those for whom the theatre is not a pastime, but a life. And to the question, why place the bottle where it was certain to be found? Unless, like the pen, it was meant to be discovered. Unless someone is still directing this play, carefully steering suspicion from one player to the next." Leaving a shaken Dewsbury behind, Poirot felt the truth cohering. The murderer was not impulsive. They were a choreographer, arranging clues like actors on a stage. To find them, one must look not at who the evidence pointed to, but at who stood to benefit from the direction of the pointer. The bottle was not a mistake, it was a line in the script, and Poirot was now reading it very closely indeed. Poirot's return to the opera house was met by a scene of fresh tumult. Inspector Halstead, his face a storm cloud, met him at the stage door. "You and your delays, Poirot," he hissed. "We have another one. Flora Gold, found in her dressing room not 10 minutes ago. She's taken poison." Poirot's frame stiffened. "She is dead?" "No, thank God. The theatre doctor was still on site. He pumped her stomach. She's conscious, but weak. And she's talking." Halstead's expression was a mix of triumph and frustration. "She's confessed. To everything." They found Flora propped on a chaise in the manager's office, wrapped in a blanket, her face the color of parchment. A glass of water shook in her hand. Harold Strickland hovered nearby, distraught. Maestro Forelli stood in the corner, his face unreadable. "She says she couldn't live with the guilt," Halstead said, his voice low. "Says she poisoned the program in the print room, using that bottle you found. Says she meant to frame Miss Price out of spite, but her conscience gave way. Poirot approached the soprano. Her eyes, enormous in her pale face, met his. There was fear in them, and a strange, defiant exhaustion. Mademoiselle Gold, this confession, it is a surprise. Yesterday you spoke of expressing emotion with your voice, not poison. I lied, she whispered, her voice a raw scrape. I hated her. She was going to take everything from me, my career, my future. I saw the bottle in Forelli's props cabinet weeks ago. He uses essence of bitter almond for some chemical reaction in a fake antique finish. I stole it. I knew the routine of the program. It was easy. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And the pen? The one found by the divan? A flicker of confusion crossed her face, hastily suppressed. I must have dropped it. I used it to apply the poison. But you told me you would not touch Lady Marchmont's things. That it was the secretary's domain. I lied about that too. Her voice gained a desperate strength. I did it. I confess it. Now please, just let me rest. Inspector Halstead nodded, satisfied. The case is closed. Attempted murder, now a full confession. She'll hang for it. Poirot did not move. His gaze swept from Flora's tortured face to Forelli's rigid posture in the corner. The maestro's eyes were fixed on the singer with an intensity that was not pity, but something closer to appraisal. A moment, Inspector, Poirot said quietly. Mademoiselle, you speak of a props cabinet, of a chemical process. This is very specific knowledge for a singer. We talk. We are around these things. She cried. And the bottle? You simply returned it to the wings after using it? A curious risk. I was panicked. Poirot turned to Forelli. Maestro, you confirm this? You had such a substance in your cabinet? Forelli started, as if from a trance. Yes, for aging metal. It is true. But it was stolen. I reported it to Strickland weeks ago. The manager nodded hurriedly. He did. I'd forgotten entirely. The pieces were assembling into a perfect, pathetic picture. Too perfect. Poirot's mind raced. The confession had the hallmarks of truth, but it fit the established facts with the slick precision of a well-rehearsed aria. It explained the bottle, the motive, the opportunity. It even clumsily accounted for the pen. But it did not account for the psychology of the first crime, the calculated theatrical framing of Miss Price. Flora's hatred was a wildfire. This crime was a cold, intricate mechanism, and her confusion over the pen was telling. She had incorporated it because she knew it was evidence, not because she had used it. Poirot looked at Flora, so desperate to claim the guilt. He looked at Forelli, watching her. He looked at Strickland, wringing his hands with a manager's relief that the show, however tragic, could finally go on. This was not a confession. It was a performance. A second act, staged to bring down the curtain prematurely. Someone had offered Flora Gold a role, the tragic, repentant murderer, and she had, in her despair, accepted it. But who was the director? You will, of course, take Mademoiselle into custody, Poirot said to Halstead, his tone neutral. But the investigation, it must be meticulous. A confession is one thing. The corroborating detail, it is another. We must verify every step. He caught the faintest glance between Forelli and Strickland, a quick, silent exchange. It was not proof, but it was a crack in the scenery. Poirot gave a small internal smile. The final act was not yet written. He would write it. Poirot did not return to his apartment. Instead, he retreated to the silence of the empty auditorium, a general reviewing the battlefield. Flora Gold's confession rang in his mind, not with the clarion call of truth, but with the rehearsed cadence of a libretto. She was protecting someone, or, more chillingly, she had been persuaded to believe she was guilty. He began to arrange the facts with fastidious care. as one would arrange rare stamps. Fact 1. The murder required intimate knowledge of two worlds, the backstage for the poison's source and the hidden bottle, and the social rituals of Lady Marchmont's box, the program routine. Fact 2. The crime was staged with a double misdirection. First, the pen pointing to Miss Price. Second, the bottle pointing to the theatrical sphere. Fact 3. Flora's confession accounted for these facts, but her understanding of them was second-hand, learned. She knew of the bottle, but her mention of the pen was hesitant, an afterthought. Fact 4. The murderer was not impulsive. They planned for discovery, for suspicion to fall on others. They were a puppeteer. His mind's eye replayed the salon. Sir Reginald, by the sideboard, passive. Miss Price, handing over the program. Flora, near the door. Dewsbury, by the window. Forelli, at the fireplace. Strickland, pacing. The fireplace. A simple, elegant deduction presented itself, so obvious he had overlooked it. The scent of bitter almonds is volatile, pervasive. In the close confines of the salon, had the program been heavily poisoned as described, would not others have smelled it the moment Miss Price carried it in? Yet only Lady Marchmont, who brought it directly to her face, had noticed. Therefore, the dose was likely applied in the room, just before she handled it, from a source close at hand. His eyes flew open. The fireplace. Maestro Forelli had been standing there, his back to the mantelpiece. A fire had been lit against the evening chill. What easier way to dispose of a small dropper or a contaminated cloth than to consign it to the flames in an instant? The bottle in the wings was a prop, a leftover to be discovered later, pointing away from the salon. Forelli had the knowledge for the poison. He had the theatrical mindset. He had a powerful motive, his life work shelved. But was that enough for murder? Perhaps not for murder alone, but for the perfect crime, one that also removed a rival? Poirot's thoughts raced ahead, making connections with dizzying speed. Flora Gould's confession. Her despair. Who could manipulate her so completely? Someone she respected, even feared. A genius whose approval she craved. A maestro. Forelli had reported the poison stolen weeks ago. A clever preemptive move. He had access to the wings, to the private box via the hidden stairs. He knew the program ritual from years of attendance. And he stood in the perfect position to apply the poison unnoticed, using the distraction of his own furious silence or a gesture toward the fireplace. He had first framed the secretary with the pen. A simple, obvious clue for the police. When Poirot's persistence uncovered the bottle, a new frame was needed. The soprano. A desperate, heartbroken artist. Perfect for the role. He had likely convinced Flora that she was in some hysterical fugue, responsible, or that confessing was the only way to save someone else, perhaps even him. The emotional manipulation of a performer was his stock in trade. Poirot stood. The harmony of the lies was now clear to him. He understood the who and the how. But the final proof, the psychological masterstroke, eluded him. Why would Forelli risk this intricate scheme? There was a piece missing, a personal, passionate motive beyond artistic rejection. He needed to understand what the Bronze Apollo truly meant to Silvio Forelli. And for that, he needed not a score, but a libretto. He needed to find the story behind the music. A visit to the maestro's private rooms, he decided, was now imperative. The truth, like a stubborn dissonance, awaited resolution. Poirot did not announce his visit. He presented himself at Maestro Forelli's elegant but austere Mayfair flat with the quiet authority of the law, though he carried no warrant. The maestro's Italian valet, after a moment of flustered hesitation, admitted him. The drawing room was a temple to music and memory. Scores were piled with precise chaos on every surface. Photographs in silver frames adorned the mantelpiece. A younger, fiery Forelli with Toscanini, a faded portrait of a beautiful, dark-eyed woman, a group shot of a chorus, one face circled lightly in pencil. Poirot's eyes, however, were drawn to the grand piano. Upon its closed lid lay not sheet music, but a thick leather-bound libretto. The title, tooled in gold, read, L'Apollo di Bronzo. "The police have already been here, Monsieur Poirot." Forelli's voice sounded from the doorway. He had changed into a silk dressing gown, but his intensity was undimmed. "They found nothing." "I am not the police," Poirot said softly, his gaze still on the libretto. "I am a student of human nature. And this," he gestured to the room, "is a most instructive text. May I?" Without waiting for an answer, he opened the leather cover. The pages were not just typed, they were annotated in a furious, spidery hand. Forelli's. Marginalia spilled into the borders, Clarissa's motif here. The betrayal must sound like tearing silk. This is the heart. The only heart. Poirot read the synopsis. The Bronze Apollo told the story of a gifted, impoverished sculptor, Alessandro, who creates a masterpiece for a wealthy, capricious patroness, Contessa Valeria. She promises him fame and fortune, but upon completion she scorns the work as derivative and locks it away in a private gallery, denying the world, and Alessandro, its glory. In a final desperate act, Alessandro destroys the statue, and himself, in a fiery inferno. "A tragedy," Poirot murmured. "It was genius." Forelli burst out, unable to contain himself. "It was my story. My magnum opus." "Your story?" Poirot prompted, turning a page. His eyes caught on the dedication page, written in a different, more feminine hand, per Silvio, con tutto il mio cuore. C. Forelli followed his gaze. The anger drained from him, replaced by a profound, weary sorrow. He seemed to collapse inward. "Clarissa," he whispered. "Clarissa Morelli, the greatest soprano of her generation. My muse. My heart." She was to sing the Contessa. It was written for her voice, for her spirit. Poirot waited, the silence a gentle pressure. "She died," Forelli said, the words dust in his mouth. 3 years ago. A sudden illness. This opera, it was our child, mine and hers. When Lady Marchmont agreed to fund it, I thought it was a resurrection, a tribute. Then that night, she called it a relic. She dismissed it. She dismissed Clarissa." His hands clenched. "It was not just an opera she cancelled. It was a tomb she sealed anew." The motive crystallized with brutal clarity. It was not merely professional pique. It was a profound, personal desecration. For a man of Forelli's passion, such an act was a mortal wound. "The poison," Poirot said, his voice still quiet. "The essence from your workshop. You reported it stolen to establish innocence. But you used it to create a different kind of tragedy. You made Flora Gold believe she was to blame, did you not? You played on her grief, her instability. You composed a confession for her as you would an aria." Forelli's head snapped up, a flash of the old fire returning. "That is a fantasy. Flora confessed freely. She is guilty. She is a broken instrument, playing a tune you wrote," Poirot countered. "But in your meticulous composition, maestro, there is one note of dissonance. The pen. The cheap pen found by the divan. Flora did not understand its role. You placed it there to frame Miss Price. But when Flora confessed, she had to claim it. She did so poorly. It did not belong to her melody. It belonged to yours." Poirot closed the libretto with a soft, definitive thud. "You have the knowledge. You had the access. You had a motive of the soul. And you have the mind of a director, arranging players and props. You hid the bottle in the wings to point to the theatrical world, knowing it would point to you, but trusting the more obvious frames, the secretary, the jealous soprano, would hold. It was, I admit, a masterful production. Forelli stood very still, his eyes locked on the portrait of the dark-eyed woman. He did not deny it. He simply said, Clarissa's voice was to have filled Covent Garden. Now, it is silent forever. What does it matter who pulled the curtain? It matters to the law, Poirot said, his voice hardening. And it matters to Hercule Poirot. The truth may not sing, maestro, but it must be heard. He had his motive. The psychological puzzle was complete. All that remained was to assemble the cast for the final, damning performance. The summons went out by telephone and police constable. One by one they returned to the Crimson Salon at Covent Garden, now a stage for the final act. Inspector Halsted, sceptical but obedient to Poirot's insistence, watched them assemble. Flora Gold, pale and supported by a police matron, Miss Evelyn Price, tight-lipped and anxious, Sir Reginald Marchmont, Viscount Dewsbury, Harold Strickland, and finally Maestro Silvio Forelli, who entered with the weary dignity of a man attending his own requiem. Poirot stood before the fireplace, a small, precise figure commanding the room. The empty divan lay between him and his audience, a silent ghost at the feast. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice clear in the hushed room. We are here to conclude the tragic affair of Lady Genevieve Marchmont. The police have a confession, but the truth, it is more complex and more cruel than a simple admission of guilt. He turned his gaze to Flora Gold. Mademoiselle, you confessed to a crime you did not commit. Your despair was genuine, your hatred was real, but your guilt was a fiction, composed for you by another. You spoke of using a pen you did not recognize with certainty. You described poisoning the program in the print room, yet the volatile poison would have filled that small space with its scent, a risk you would not take. No, you were manipulated by a master of emotion into playing the role of the tragic murderer. Flora stared, confusion breaking through her numbness. The truth, Poirot continued, begins not with a bottle in the wings but with a heartbreak. The heartbreak of an artist whose life's work and living memorial to a lost love was callously dismissed as a relic. He looked at Forelli. For Maestro Forelli, the murder was not merely an act of revenge. It was the destruction of one who had desecrated a sacred memory, and it was to be a perfect theatrical production. Poirot paced slowly. He had the poison. He reported it stolen weeks ago, a clever preparation. He knew the routine of the program. During the supper, he stood here, by this fireplace. When Miss Price placed the program on the divan, and before Lady Marchmont picked it up, he had a moment. A small vial, a few drops applied to the cover. The fire beside him would consume any evidence instantly. Only when Lady Marchmont brought it close to her face would the fumes strike. Inspector Halsted leaned forward. But the pen? The bottle in the wings? Misdirection. Stagecraft. Poirot declared. The pen, planted to point to Miss Price. Too obvious. A first act. The bottle, placed to be found, pointing to the theatrical world and, through stolen poison, to Mademoiselle Gold. He needed a culprit. When I pressed too close, he provided one. He preyed upon Mademoiselle Gold's grief and instability, weaving a tale that made her believe she was responsible, or that confession was noble. He is a manipulator of souls, this man. Forelli's face was a stony mask. This is fantasy. Proof? The proof is in the psychology. Poirot's eyes blazed. The crime is yours, maestro. It required a mind that thinks in gestures, in symbols, in grand, tragic narratives. The spoiled artist, the framed secretary, the hysterical soprano. These are your characters. Only you move between the world of the wings and the salon with ease. Only you had a motive beyond money or piquet, a motive of the heart, twisted by grief into something monstrous. And only you could make a broken woman sing a confession she did not write. Poirot turned to the group, his voice dropping to a conclusive pitch. The physical evidence is circumstantial, but the pattern of the mind is unique. It points to one man, and one man alone. He composed this tragedy. And now the curtain falls. All eyes turn to Silvio Forelli. The maestro did not speak. He merely looked at the portrait of his beloved Clarissa that hung over the fireplace, his silence more condemning than any denial. The gathering held its breath, awaiting the final, inevitable accusation. The silence in the salon was absolute, thick enough to stifle breath. All eyes were fixed on Maestro Silvio Forelli. He did not look at the accusing faces, but kept his gaze lifted to some point above the fireplace, as if reading a score only he could see. Then, very slowly, he began to smile. It was not a pleasant expression, but one of tragic, weary triumph. "A performance, Poirot," he said, his voice resonant in the quiet. "You speak of my production, but you have merely described the staging. You have not heard the music." He turned, and for the first time, his eyes, blazing with a fervent light, swept the room. "You think this was about revenge? A petty settling of scores? No, this was about art, about the sacred, which she profaned, about beauty, which she trampled into commerce." His voice rose, filling the space like an aria. "She was a Philistine with a checkbook. My Apollo was not mere music. It was Clarissa's monument. To lock it away was a sin greater than theft. It was a murder of the soul." Inspector Halstead moved forward, but Poirot held up a subtle hand. "Let the man compose his own finale. You are correct in your mechanics, little detective," Forelli said, addressing Poirot with a scornful respect. "The poison was mine. The report of its theft was the first note of the composition. The pen, a crude but necessary dissonance to point to the faithful scribbler." He glanced dismissively at Miss Price. "The bottle in the wings. A leitmotif to be discovered in the second act, pointing to the world of make-believe where passions run hot." His eyes flicked to Flora Gold, who shrank back. And the confession, the tragic soprano's final, flawed aria. She was perfect for the role, all grief and noise, no substance. "You monster," Flora whispered, the truth now dawning in her eyes, breaking through the fog of manipulation. "I offered her redemption." Forelli shot back. A chance to be part of something grand. Instead of a petty singer dismissed, she could be the tragic heroine, center stage in a real drama. But she could not even play that correctly. And the actual moment of the crime? Poirot prompted, his voice cool. Forelli's manner became almost instructional, simplicity itself. When the secretary placed the program on the divan, I was at the mantel. I had the vial in a handkerchief. A cough, a step forward to adjust a cuff, a drop brushed across the glossy cover. The fire consumed the handkerchief. The scent was faint, localized. Only when she brought it close, inhaling deeply to make some caustic remark, would it take effect. A death as dramatic as her life. It was fitting. Sir Reginald Marchmont made a small, choked sound of disgust. Viscount Dewsbury stared with a kind of horrified fascination. "You confess, then, to the murder of Lady Genevieve Marchmont?" Inspector Halstead said, his voice formal, stepping forward. "I confess to removing a blight," Forelli corrected, drawing himself up, to silencing a voice that sought to silence eternity. "You will try me, convict me, no doubt. But my music, my Apollo, it will now be performed. The scandal, the notoriety, it will demand it. Strickland will have no choice. He turned wild eyes to the manager. You will stage it. It will be my legacy. Clarissa's legacy. Harold Strickland could only gape, aghast. Poirot shook his head, a gesture of profound pity. You see, Inspector, even now he believes the ends justify the means. He murders for art, and expects art to crown him a martyr. He has confused creation with destruction. Forelli's triumph faltered, just for a second, as the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. The physical reality of the law seemed to jar against his operatic fantasy. He looked at Poirot, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. You understand order, Poirot. Symmetry. My design was perfect. It was perfectly monstrous, Poirot replied. The most profound disorder is that which dresses itself in the clothes of beauty. You did not create anything here, Maestro. You only ended a life. The art you claim to serve would be ashamed of you. As Inspector Halstead led him away, Forelli began to hum, a dark, mournful phrase from his own doomed opera. The sound faded down the corridor. In the aftermath, the salon seemed to exhale. Flora Gold wept, this time with relief. Miss Price busied herself straightening a cushion, her hands still trembling. The others stood in silent shock. Poirot approached Inspector Halstead. The case, it is concluded. Thanks to you, Halstead grunted. I had the wrong woman. I would have had the wrong woman twice over. It was all theatre persistent, Poirot said. And in the theatre, one must always look for the director. Silvio Forelli was tried and convicted of the murder of Lady Genevieve Marchmont. His plea of artistic passion found no sympathy with the court. He was sentenced to hang. Flora Gold, exonerated, left the country for a fresh start on the continent. Sir Reginald Marchmont, freed from his gilded cage, devoted a portion of his inherited wealth to a quiet musical foundation, pointedly not for opera. The Bronze Apollo was never performed. A week later, Poirot sat in his immaculate apartment, sipping a glass of sirop de cassis. His friend, Captain Hastings, who had read the sensational reports, exclaimed, "By Jove, Poirot, what a business! To kill for an opera." Poirot placed his glass down with exactitude, aligning it perfectly with the edge of a coaster. No, Hastings. He did not kill for an opera. He killed because he believed the world must conform to the drama inside his own head. That is the greatest vanity, and the most dangerous. The human heart, it is the most complex mystery of all. It can create sublime beauty, and in the very same beat justify the most terrible crime. Order, mon ami, is not merely in the arrangement of furniture. It is in the submission of one's passions to reason, and of one's art to humanity. He smoothed the front of his waistcoat, a small, fastidious gesture that banished the shadow of the opera house. Now, we shall think of it no more. The symmetry has been restored. Pass me the newspaper, I pray you. Let us see if the world has learned to be a little more sensible.